1631. E4 is our move. And I'm tired of the C3 Sicilian, so let's play mainline. We're gonna do mainline stuff, and I'm going to introduce you guys to a line that I play full time when I play 1e4, and that's called the Rossolimo. And the Rossolimo, it's a very misunderstood opening because people think of this as the Ruy Lopez, or people are you just playing the Spanish. Remember, the blacks played the Sicilian, so you can't take one opening and name a different opening the same opening, because if black played a different move, the nature of the position is going to be different. So we're going to play the move bishop b5. This is a move played very, very commonly at the top level. And not as much at, I would say, the club player level. Really not as much, because it's quite difficult to understand some of the ideas. It's very positional, and it's a little bit less intuitive than the Ruy Lopez. And the Ruy Lopez, the reason you play this move is to put pressure on the e5 pawn, if you think about it. Right? You want to take the knight at some point and attack the pawn. In the Rossolimo, there's no pawn to attack. So why are you putting the bishop here? You're really putting the bishop here to take the knight. That's essentially the point. And the move a6 is a waste of time, because in many lines you take the knight of your own free will. This is a waste of a tempo. And the consequence of this is that black has damaged his pawn structure. And I've railed on for game after game about how pawn structure isn't that important, which is exactly why I don't often recommend the Rossolimo to people in the 1600-1700 range. You should either play the c3 Sicilian, or you should play the open Sicilian and just play d4. But I still want to introduce you to some of the high-level logic behind these openings, because they can be helpful even if you don't play the openings. And this pawn structure deficiency is kind of a big deal at a high level, because, not to sound condescending, but, like, GMs know how to punish, how to exploit it, and it takes a lot of positional finesse. Some of this even I don't have, which is why I sometimes play the sidelines within the Rossolimo. So let's begin by developing. First of all, we need to castle. Nothing happens here without castling. Now, how should white handle black's pawn structure? What does it even mean to exploit this damaged pawn structure? Oftentimes what you'll see is that when you, and I don't know all of these ideas, so we might not be playing in the best way. One of the things that we can do, the simplest idea, and this can be borrowed from the Ruy Lopez, is to control the center. Because when we control the center, let's imagine that this c-pawn was gone. Let's imagine this pawn was gone. This pawn on c6 would kind of be weak. The pawn on a6 would kind of be weak, so it would be easier to access the pawns that are left behind. And there's a very simple idea here that you see very commonly in the Ruy Lopez that seems particularly good here. But before we play it, in the Rossolimo, it is often a very good idea to prevent the bishop from coming out to g4. That is just an automatic move in most positions in the Rossolimo. Okay, knight f6. So he's attacking the pawn. We should defend it. e5 is interesting, but it gives the knight a very nice central square on d5. I think it's premature. The idea that I was talking about is, of course, c3, d4. So what move should we play here to not interfere with our plan of going c3, d4? How should we, knowing that we're going to play c3, we shouldn't play knight c3. We should play rook e1, yes. Slightly violating the rule that you should defend with the lowest value piece, but we are trying to go... Okay, he's playing very quickly here and very sloppily. That castles was a big mistake. He's allowing us to make more weaknesses. What should we do now? It's not a hook because he's not going to castle long. I mean, look at his queen side. So he's not going to attack us on the king side anytime soon. So it's knight e5. I think you guys are going for the tempting move, but again, e5, he's got knight d5. Just take the pawn. Just take the pawn. Now look at this disaster that's happening on the queen side. And this disaster is very easy to attack. The bishop's going to come out here eventually and attack this pawn. Now where should we put our queen? You should always be looking for those squares that are out of the way, in a little cul-de-sac somewhere, not interfering with any of the other pieces, but also doing something preferably of an attacking nature. So don't settle on c2. Let's go to a4, because it's protecting this pawn, but it's also attacking c6. This is an ideal square for the queen. The queen is often very well placed on the edges of the board because it's hard to attack, and it doesn't always sacrifice quality because the queen is still doing a lot. Unlike a knight, the queen doesn't sort of not control squares just because it's on the edge. All right, queen b6. Now I'm looking at his queen and I'm saying, okay, this queen is very vulnerable in many different ways. We need to eventually develop these two pieces. They're not developed yet. In what order? Well, if we bring our bishop out, we obviously lose the pawn on b2. I think some people would play b3 at this point, but that's very weakening because that allows this bishop on g7 to get very nice control over the diagonal. So one maneuver that those with good positional understanding will see is knight a3 to c4. Knight a3, very nice. Most people are seeing it pretty quickly. Maybe not knight c4 immediately, but that's the ultimate idea. We go knight c4, attack the queen, defend the pawn, pave the way for the bishop coming out, but maybe not yet. We'll see whether we can refine this. Because, and this is where things get positionally complex. Knight c4 is a mistake here. It is a mistake, it's premature. And we should begin, I think, by chasing this bishop out of e6 with knight g5. So we're going to play this move because we're pretty slow, but think about it, and then after the game, we will revisit this moment and talk about why knight c4 is bad. This is a very instructive moment, in my opinion. It shows the intersection of positional thinking and tactics. Well, knight d2 blocks the bishop. That's the only reason. It would have probably led to the same thing. Oh, now look at what he allows us to do. Look at his pawns. This is pretty epic. This is pretty epic. Okay. Now how should we... What should we do? Again, knight c4 is extremely tempting, but I believe that it's not the best move. Amazingly. I know that sounds crazy. But we have to answer why. And we'll talk more about this after the game. Yeah, queen c4 is what I like the most. The problem with knight c4, and we have to answer this question, is that black is this incredibly annoying move, queen to b5. And our queen is under fire. If we take his queen, we allow him to correct his pawn structure, which is a really big deal. I don't want to let him fix all of his pawn structure deficiencies on the queen side. That's what we're trying to attack. And it's extremely hard to... We can play queen b3 there and try to trade on our own terms. So black is going to try to trade on his terms. He's going to give us a counteroffer. And, you know, the asking price there is too high. So instead, if we pay attention to this e6 pawn, we can just drag our queen over to c4. That's a very awkward looking move, but it's very strong because he barely can defend this pawn. He can go rook f6. Obviously, we can go e5 in response to that, just attack the rook. All right, so when there are so many weaknesses in a position, just abandon, you know, your move shouldn't have to look good. It doesn't have to look good. Just look at ways to attack the weaknesses, all right? Put aside considerations of, oh, well, does this move follow the rules? At this point, it's time to put your concrete thinking hat on and take all of his pieces. All right, so he's just starting to give up everything. c4 is... Okay, now he lets us put the knight on c... I assumed he wanted to maybe sack the queen on f2, but it doesn't do anything. We still have to be careful. Our queen is a little bit stuck on d7. So what should we do here? Well, we've got a couple of possible moves. We also need to be very mindful of bishop h4 as a potential threat. We need to first and foremost ask ourselves, is he threatening to trap the queen? Is this a priority? Do we need to bring the queen back to d3? Because if we bring back the queen to d3, he does have bishop h4. That's a tiny bit concerning. I'm going to play this move anyway because I see a response to bishop h4. If he plays it, we'll have a chance to find that response. Because bishop h4 puts 3 attackers on the f2 pawn and only 1 defender. Just mathematically, there's no way to defend that pawn. But what we can do is we can soften the blow. He doesn't do it. This allows us to just get our bishop out and defend. This is the move we would have played even if he would have played bishop h4, by the way. Bishop b3, queen b5. Let's go a4. Let's just get his queen out of there. He's probably going to go here. And I have a really sick idea. I have a really cool idea if he goes queen b3. I really hope he does. Because not only is this... Okay, he doesn't. Damn. Okay, that's fine. So, not much that we have to do here. We simply have to identify pieces that we haven't brought in. We have many good moves. What's an example of a good sort of solid move? Bringing the last piece into the game. So bishop d4 would allow e5. You could shut down that trade opportunity. I would just go rook a to d1. I would play it very methodically. If he goes rook d8, we can take the rook and take the rest of his pieces. We will have 2 rooks and 2 pieces for the queen. That is just completely winning. This bishop h6, so he's trying to trade on his own. I mean, sure. Thank you. Absolutely. Okay, now again, it's important not to overthink these things. Knight e5 is good. Bring our queen into the game with queen d7. Let's go queen g3. We can sort of limit the mobility of his queen and pave the way for rook to d7. That's just one way of playing it. One of many. He is winning on time. That's true. We can trade queens. We don't have to. There's no need to. I'm almost struggling because of how many good moves there are. Let's begin with the move rook to e3. Maybe we'll get it to f3 and offer the trade of rooks. Yeah, knight e5 is fine. I just didn't want to give up the b2 pawn. It's not a big deal either way. It's completely winning. But we're going to lift our rook and either trade rooks or, you know, one of whatever is going to happen is going to be good for us. Suffering from success. Yeah, this is not a very interesting part of the game. You can just practice these kinds of things with a computer, for example. You can just set it up and you know, set up a position where you're up like a queen or something and just practice some reps. Now here we have a nice tactic. Okay, Vakambandejo found it. Nice little fork with a nice little touch at the end because he does have queen e6. I wonder who saw that. Who saw that he could play queen e6, counterattack the rook? Who can tell me the entire line? Now what should we do here? Should we take the rook? Do we have another move? Here the 15-second rule should be applied. Don't stop calculating when it seems like the position may have taken a turn for the worse. We can play queen e5 and trade queens. Nicely done to spot it, but we can take first and then play queen e5 and then checkmate him on g7 and that's game over. Okay. Yeah, plethora is right. Boom. Okay. And we're over 1600. Great. So, sorry. Okay, so that was a nice game. And the Rossolimo is named after Nicholas Rossolimo, who has a very interesting life story. Peter did a lecture on him. Originally born in France, I think in 1890, moved to New York, worked as a taxi driver. He had his own chess store. I mean, very colorful character. But that's for another, we'll save that for another time. And people often play bishop b5, not because they want to play the Rossolimo, but because they think they're playing the Ruy Lopez. So this does happen sometimes in beginner games, where people play bishop b5 thinking, yeah, I'm playing the Ruy Lopez. It was first played in 1851. Rossolimo was far from the first one to play this move. And in the very first game where this was featured, black, by the way, was Van Cruijs. And Van Cruijs sort of quote-unquote invented e3, which is sometimes called the Van Cruijs game, or the Van Cruijs defense. Not a very memorable contribution to opening theory, but nonetheless. And Van Cruijs played a6. So a6 is an instinctive move if you're used to playing this in the Ruy Lopez. Right? But it's a waste of time because white takes this knight anyway. So the main moves here are g6. You can play the accelerated dragon way. You can play e6. So you can play the same moves you would make against d4, right? And all of these moves are sensible. d6 is a little bit more, you know, pushing it a little bit, but it's perfectly legitimate. As I play d6 with black when I go into this position. There's even knight f6, sort of an Alekhine-like idea, although it's a little bit, you know, not as fashionable. And there's a few very fringe moves. There's knight d4. There's even knight a5 has been played against me. So a6 takes. Yeah. And in the main line, you know, white sometimes castles. If you watch my games, you'll see that I play this sort of hybrid between the Alapin and the Rossolimo. I like the move c3, which has become popular recently. Vaca, thank you for the prime. But the main line is to take on c6. Both DC and BC are possible. DC is more common, opening up the bishop. And white almost always plays h3 to stop bishop g4, and you get this very, very well-known structure, the Rossolimo structure. And it's very interesting. Black has the two bishops, but he's got this sort of reminds you of the exchange Rai Lopez, right? Where white can attack these pawns in a variety of ways. Black can play King's Indian style, moving the knight away and going f5. I myself am very unfamiliar with the theory here. Black can also go e5, creating the sort of Marozzi bind. Bishop g4 is not really a threat. It's just that this bishop often doesn't find a good place. Like, if you think about it, like, where is this bishop going to develop? Do you see a good spot for it? Because I don't. It's just sort of sitting there. It's good that black has the two bishops, but as of now, this bishop just doesn't have a good place to go to. So it's not that it's a positional threat. And positional threats are not threats to win material, but threats to do something that's positionally or strategically good. So just trade off a favorable piece. All right, so again, we're operating here on a completely positional level. Nothing here is tactical or immediate. Yeah, you can play BC and take toward the center, but then you get this sort of damaged pawn structure that we saw in our game, and this can be hard to deal with. So again, I don't want to delve too deeply into the theory. You can search YouTube, Introduction to Rossolimo. I'm sure you can find some videos and stuff. But that's the bottom line. It's a superpositional line. Okay. So a6 takes. We castle. So here we went h3. I wasn't planning to, but yeah, then I realized, again, look at this bishop. It can go to f5. It can go to g4. Ugh. And what is it doing here? It literally has no good place. It's a funny situation. You don't get this too often where a piece just doesn't have a good spot to develop to. The Rossolimo is kind of unique in this way. I guess in the French, black buries his own bishop. Here, oh, it's clipping? Okay, let me just lower the gain. Yeah, here it's very, very hard to get the bishop anywhere. Okay, so knight f6, rook e1. Yeah, and so the question here is, well, he castled, he made it very easy for us. Of course, we should play CD, or black should play CD. Doesn't this undouble black's pawns? Well, yes, it does, but everything is a balance, right? The first thing to notice is that we get a very nice pawn center, very nicely supported by pieces. The other thing I pointed out is that even though it undoubles black's pawns, black still has two pawn weaknesses on the queen side. Both of them are relatively accessible. You can play queen a4, you can play queen c2, and, you know, and target the pawn straight away. And the third thing is that white can create further pawn structure weaknesses. White can go e5. White just has a very nice position. Don't overthink this. Black has a hard time developing this bishop. White's got a nice center. Black's got pawn weaknesses. That's it. I'm seeing what you're seeing. I'm not seeing anything else. Bishop g5, rook c1, super easy natural play. Black is cramped, pawn weaknesses, and no clear plan of action, no clear way of developing this bishop anywhere good. So it's, you know, it's a good edge for white. White is not winning, but white is clearly better here. So our opponent played instantly. He castles, takes. It's way too early to talk about converting. Way too early. Right? Like if you talk about this position, white is clearly better, but you would make all the good moves here. Bishop g5, rook c1, queen d2, bishop h6 is always a plan to consider here, just to eliminate this bishop. You would be looking in positions for like e5 at the right moment. Maybe e5 pawn break when the bishop is here to target that pawn. There's a million things you could do. And you need to be patient with yourself in terms of developing mastery in those positions. They're hard to convert, for sure. Okay, so takes. We go queen a4. Again, looking for the best square. It's out of the way. Attack the pawn. Queen b6, knight a3. Yeah, so the only reason I didn't go here is because it blocks the bishop. That may end up not being important in the grand scheme of things, but why limit yourself? Bishop b6 is not a bad move. And a lot of people would play knight c4 here. This is a big mistake due to queen b5. So what's going on here? Well, there's contact between the queens, and white has no choice in this position but to trade queens, because the knight is being attacked from two different places. So after takes, black no longer has any pawn structure weaknesses, and he still has the two bishops. Now this bishop all of a sudden has come out to a good spot. Black is better, right? So things change in an instant. That is one of the reasons why beginners, intermediate players find it easier to deal with tactics, because when you are trying to nurse a positional advantage, everything could be ruined in a single move. Like a pawn structure deficiency could be corrected. You could allow your opponent to undouble or get active, and then everything dissipates so quickly. Positional advantages are very fragile, right? They're like you know, they're like air bubbles. You have to be, or sky bubbles, okay, terrible. You have to be very careful about how you handle them. And tactics is a bridge that allows somebody to reverse a positional disadvantage and make it into a positional advantage, which is exactly what happens here. Right? This is using the tactics, using the, not fancy tactics, but the queen being hanging. The fact that it's hanging is a tactical property of the position. The move b3 would not be good here, you know, right? Because it opens up the diagonal for the bishop. Anyways, I don't want to belabor the point. Now, he played knight d7. This is basically a decisive mistake. Of course, he had to move his bishop back, as unpleasant as it is. Now knight c4 is still not ideal. I wouldn't rush with it. What should we do here? What should we do here? Yeah, so bishop e3. He can take the pawn, I'm afraid. Did you guys find a way to trap the queen? Because I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing a way to trap the queen. If there was a way to trap the queen here, I'd go for this. But if there wasn't, I wouldn't risk it. Although you can play knight c. I mean, white is still dominating, even without these pawns. I would just go e5, yeah. I would shove this through all the way to e6. Just take and I mean, look at this. This is equally as good as the game. Black would not... Black maybe should go back to c8, honestly, just not to allow e6 with tempo. But now already bishop e3 looks a lot more appealing because, well, you have this move with tempo at some... I don't want to... I'm too lazy to calculate right now. I've done enough of that against Hal. But you know what? You understand what I'm saying, I think. Now, this move allows queen c4. The game is over after this move. Even if he didn't blunder his knight, he would have to give up this pawn, and his other pawns would fall like dominoes. So basically, the only thing to avoid here is this automatic move knight c4. And how do you know to check for queen b5? The thing that makes knight c4 less appealing to me is that you have to go back for a second, ask yourself, wait, I'm finishing after this game, guys. Guys, I'm finishing after this game. Oh my god, is Charlie rating? Wow, Charlie just rated with 7,000 plus. I was planning to go in like 1 minute, but maybe I can stick around for one more game if you guys behave yourselves, only because Charlie's the man. Thank you. Let's jump in for a game. So yeah, to those of you who were here before, once we win the night, the game is already over. Thank you, Suburban Yip, for the tier 1. The game is already over, obviously, and the rest was pretty self-explanatory. So let's begin. We have the white pieces here against a 1600. So, oh my god, $20 donation from Pink Magic. Here is my last donation of the night. Oh god, terrible joke. I was about to thank you, but then I saw the joke. So let's go e4. And we've played a whole bunch of openings in, and thanks for that, for those 20 bucks. We played a whole bunch of openings in the speedrun. And as I said last time, the opening that I recommend to probably people in the 15, 16, 1700 rating range is the Vienna Gambit. The Vienna Gambit is, it almost never fails at this level. It almost never fails to get a great position. And in the Vienna Gambit, which I've played before, thank you, Penguino Supreme, you go knight c3. Now, to those of you from Charlie's stream, I'm sure you guys have heard the term Gambit before. Gambit is a type of opening. When I say opening, that's the first couple of moves in a chess game. The first approximately 10, 15 moves. There's no exact number. But the start of a chess game is called the opening. And there are different openings. Openings have names. They can be named after people. So somebody could have played an opening a million times, and that's the moist critical variation. Okay, there is no moist critical variation yet, but maybe there will be. But there are also gambits. Like there's the King's Gambit, and a gambit is when you sacrifice a pawn or more to gain something specific, like control of the center. And one of the most important things to do in an opening is to gain control of the center of the board. The center is these 4 squares that I've highlighted, but these two, this is called a file, these 2 files, it's super important to get your pieces onto squares, where they're basically controlling squares on these files. I know I'm giving a lot of information at once. And so this move f4, which, if you look carefully, right, it gives up a pawn. Black can just take our pawn with his pawn, and that's called the Vienna Gambit. Thank you, Jay Cesis, for the 5. Wow, we got way too much hype in here. All right. Now, what do we gain in return for this particular gambit? This is a very classical gambit in the sense that we get control of the center. Once this pawn leaves e5, it's like the light goes from red to green. This pawn on e4 can push forward and attack the knight. If he does this, we'll talk about it. If not, we'll talk about it after the game. He does it. All right, I ain't called a prophet for nothing. So the pawn on e5, right, it's moved away from that square. The light is turned green. This pawn can move forward. What does that move accomplish? You don't make a move that looks good without understanding specifically what it accomplishes. Well, what does e5 accomplish? It attacks the knight, and that knight doesn't have too many good squares to go to. This knight has been developed. So development is the process of bringing your pieces out from their initial squares. And when you attack a developed piece, you force it to move. If the knight doesn't move, we take it, and a pawn's much less valuable than the knight. Now, he's gone queen e7, but I just want you to notice that the knight doesn't have any good squares to go to. These two squares are controlled by the queen, right? These two squares are controlled, the ones that I'm going to highlight in red, or green rather, are controlled by the knight. So if the knight were to move, it would have to go back to its initial square. That's a huge waste of time. Instead, our opponent has decided to go queen to e7. Now, I'm trying to take the knight, but I can't. Why not? What's going on here? Now, obviously, I know that those of you who are advanced, this is very basic, but this is kind of impromptu, so I wish if I had prepared these explanations, they'd be more smooth. You can't take the knight because the pawn is pinned. What does it mean for the pawn to be pinned? It means the pawn cannot move, because if the pawn moves, it exposes an attack against the king. So if a piece or a pawn is pinned, moving it results in exposing a piece of greater value. If this were a queen, right, the pawn would be legally able to move. So if a queen is the piece that's on the opposite end of a pin, it's not like you can't move the pin piece, but here you can because it's illegal. It is illegal to leave your king exposed or in check. So what he's done is he's immobilized the pawn. And he's done that because the pawn was attacking the knight. Now, our goal here is to make a move so that the pawn is able to attack the knight once again. We need to unpin ourselves. What does that mean? Well, we need to put something in the line of fire of black's queen. That should make logical sense even if you don't know the rules of chess. There is only one way to do that without losing the pawn. And you might say, okay, so let's go bishop e2. Let's put a bishop here and block the pin. But that's not good, right? Because then the queen can take that pawn on e5, which is unprotected. So we have a second thing to do. We need to unpin ourselves and do it in a way where the pawn is protected. So there's only one way of doing that, and that is queen to e2. Queen to e2. Pawn to d4 doesn't unpin the pawn. It defends it, but doesn't unpin it. Queen e2. Our queen moves into the same position that black's queen has gone to, and we are once again threatening to take the knight and win the knight. Now you might say, well, what about the fact that doesn't that hang the queen? Doesn't that give the queen up? Well, no, because our queen is defended by a bunch of pieces, right? So it's all pretty simple. All right, knight g8. So now what we need to do is we need to bring our other knight out to the best square that it can come out to. This is very common. Black is already lost. So trust me, the time use is fine. We are already winning on this move if we can find the correct move. Now, one very common piece of advice is that you should not develop your queen too early in the game. Why is that? Well, it's very, very simple. If you're a war general, do you go out onto the front lines with a sword and just like, I'm going to fight the enemy, I'm going to be the one on the front line fighting? Like, no. The queen is your most valuable asset. It's your strongest piece. You only send it out when the coast is clear. If the coast isn't clear, the queen's going to get attacked by all of the pieces. And without any kind of protection from the other pieces, the queen is useless. It's going to get attacked. It's going to get sent back to its initial square. And you're going to waste a huge amount of time, and you can't afford to do that. How can we attack this queen? Yeah, well, Genghis Khan, it may have been an exception. So we have our two knights developed. He doesn't have anything developed, and that's the difference. Our queen can't be attacked. His queen can. And it can be attacked by positioning our knight in the center, knight d5. Knight d5, attacking his queen. And there's a big problem that he has. He can't move his queen just anywhere. If he brings his queen up, we capture his pawn. That's a fork. He's got to bring his queen back to its initial square. And then we have a beautiful move that crushes the game immediately. After that, we have a move. We have several moves that win. But there's one very cool move that I think particularly, and he just resigned. Now, what does that even mean? That means he gives up the game because he knows that he has already lost. He has recognized that the game is basically over. It's sad because I don't get a chance to show the win, but I will show it now. Whew. Sorry, that was a lot of explanations in like 3 moves. Yeah, so right now, where am I in the speedrun? Those of you who aren't usually in my stream, I do have a YouTube channel, by the way. It's just my name, Daniel Naroditsky. You can find me on YouTube. All of the speedrun videos are uploaded with a delay, right? So I did a previous version of this where I have 5 minutes per game rather than 10 minutes per game. And that has been uploaded in its entirety. I have just a few less subs than Moist does, but if you want to watch more educational videos on demand, you can subscribe to my YouTube. I'd be honored. Slowly building up toward 200K subs. So that's there for you. Obviously, I do these speedruns live as well, so people can ask questions, and then that's uploaded. So anyways, knight c3, knight f6. Knight f3, of course, is the main move in this position. Thank you. f4. No, of course, Charlie's the man, and I really appreciate people sticking around, even though I know some of you don't play chess very much. So thanks again. I'm doing what I can. And $5 to ping magic again. All right. So f4 is the Vienna Gambit. Now, why is it called? Yeah, I saw him playing Bullet today. We'll definitely try to get a lesson in at some point. He worked very hard for PogChamps 3, so it's important to take breaks when you're playing chess. But I definitely think he'll show his strength many more times in the chess. Well, I think it's Zug the Nuke. Anyways, so why is it called the Vienna Gambit? Well, obviously it's named after Vienna, Austria. And usually what happens with chess opening names is that if it's named after a city, then there was a tournament held in that city, and in that tournament, people would play this opening for some reason, coincidentally. Like if 3 or 4 players in that particular tournament or competition played this move, then it would be called the Vienna opening, right? Because it was played in some random tournament in Vienna. Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know what tournament this was, but that would be my guess. I don't actually know what tournament was held in Vienna. Okay, so e takes f4, he takes. This is a big mistake. Accepting the Vienna Gambit in this way is a mistake, precisely because of what we did, and I'll get to that. Now, gambits can be accepted, they can be declined, or you can offer a counter gambit. You sacrifice something, and then your opponent sacrifices something of their own in return. Now, what does it mean to decline a gambit? Well, in gambiting this pawn, we're also attacking black's pawn. We're threatening to take it. If black just makes a random move, we're going to just take black's pawn. So what can black do to defend this pawn? In order to not give it up, but also not take white's pawn, you can just say, I want this pawn here, and I'm going to bring my own pawn up to d6, in order to build this little pawn chain. If white takes, then black takes, and nothing really happens. We have a trade. Nobody really benefits from this trade. Yeah, chess tournaments are resuming slowly but surely, sort of post-COVID. I've read it's usually better to decline early gambits. I wouldn't generalize. There are some which should be accepted, but there's always going to be some way to decline the gambit and have a good position. But the problem with the move d6, and this is sort of high-level chess thinking, one of the reasons that chess is hard, there's many reasons chess is hard. One of the reasons is that there's so many things to keep track of. Like, you do a lot of thinking in one direction, and you're like, oh, I completely forgot about this other thing that this move does, and it goes on and on and on. So one thing that d6 does, if you look at this bishop on f8, right, you need to develop the bishop. As I said at the start, you need to develop your pieces in ways where they control various squares in the center. So in this case, the ideal square for the bishop would generally be on c5, right here. Or on b4, so the squares I've highlighted in blue. How? Oh my god. Oh my goodness. There is no way this just happened. Holy smokes! Oh my god, this, I could tell something was going to happen. Dikayo with 100 subs! Damn, girl. Oh my god, this is getting ridiculous. Wow. It is good to see you, Dikayo. He's been a supporter for a long time, and you are the absolute man. 100 subs. That's incredible. Super high energy stuff. I don't know why my alert doesn't seem to work. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Wow. And sorry for the bad chess yesterday. I'm speechless. Well, we just got 100 subs, folks. So, incredible stuff. Yeah, this community is phenomenal. But yeah, before I was rudely distracted by this sub bomb, I was talking about something totally useless, which is what I normally talk about. So I was talking about declining the gambit, right? So the bishop belongs on c5 and b4. Thank you, Dikai. I really appreciate that. 100 subs. That is a massive bomb right there. And if you think about it, the problem with the move d6 is that it doesn't allow the bishop to come out to c5. You can't jump over. The knight is the only piece that can jump over a pawn. The bishop can't jump over your own pawn. And so this bishop is limited to getting out to e7. That's a very passive square. So the word passive in chess just means a square where a piece doesn't do that much, right? It's similar to the definition in like real life. So there's all these considerations. And so the best move here is a counter gambit, which is well, not really a counter gambit. Let's move d5. d5 opens up the center. Thank you, Blindfold Bolo. And if white takes the pawn on e5, black's knight can swoop in and take white's pawn on e4. If you think about it, white's king is kind of weak. Black's queen can come out and deliver this check on h4. This is a super complicated position. I don't want to talk too much about it. As I progress in the speedrun, I'm almost definitely going to have this position on the board, and so I'll be able to talk more about it. I think I've already had it once. The best move is to bring the queen out to f3. And that leads me to one other point before I get to the game, which is that when you're a beginner, you learn all these rules. Thank you for the 100 bits. You learn to develop your pieces. You learn not to bring your queen out too early. Then you're like, let me watch how the Grandmasters play. And you watch the Grandmasters play, and you're looking at the game, and they're like, what are the Grandmasters doing? Didn't he just say not to bring the queen out too early? Why are you bringing the queen out too early? So when you learn these rules, the better you get, the more you learn that there are a ton of exceptions to the rules that help you gain basic strength, which is, I think, something that whatever, if you play video games, I'm sure that there is an equivalent. And I, unfortunately, am not skilled in any other game. I'm barely skilled in chess. But perhaps people could let me know. But I'm sure this sort of learning process takes place where you learn all these very basic rules about how to maneuver your character or whatnot. But then the really good players, they often violate these rules because they've mastered these rules a very long time ago, and they're basically playing at another completely different level. The hillbilly is the new Berlin defense. You know, Dikai, if only you'd gifted 100 subs, maybe I would have been able to accommodate your request. Exceptions override generalizations, absolutely. Learn the rules so you can break them. And again, I'm sure other games have these kinds of analogies. Any game where you can become very skilled. Okay. So anyways, he plays e takes f4, we go e5. And, oh my god. Is this a glitch? Woo! Oh my god! That's another 100! What? This is insane. 200 from Dikayo. Woo! This is insane. And I had the audacity to refuse to answer his question. Time to talk about the hillbilly, absolutely. Now this saint who just gifted these subs, he is a proponent of an opening that he has an unholy obsession with, which is e4, c6, bishop c4. This is the hill, really, right? This is the famous opening. He's gifted 200 subs to make me show it on the board. I'm fine with that. Wow. Incredible. Total madman. Another 100. Well, just another day in the office, folks. Another day in the office. All right. Thanks to you. I am honored. All right. Well, again, I was rudely interrupted again. Man, I can never seem to finish my thoughts. I keep getting gifted hundreds of subs. Just horrible toxicity by the community. So e takes f4, we go e5, we chase away the knight. And basically, as I explained, he went with queen e7 to pin this pawn. If he had moved the knight, the only place to move it would have been back to g8, which is essentially undeveloping the knight. He doesn't have anything developed, and we have both of our knights developed. This is called a development advantage, when you have more pieces out than your opponent does. And that's, generally speaking, a good thing. So we've sacrificed our pawn to get a big development advantage and better control of the center. We have a monster on e5 just sitting here controlling these squares, and he doesn't have anything. I mean, black literally doesn't have a single piece developed. This pawn is sort of irrelevant. We're going to pick it up later. And, you know, e takes f4 is already a mistake. Queen e7, queen e2, unpinning, threatening once again to take the knight. The knight moves back, so we essentially have the same position, except the queens have moved out to these two squares. This didn't really change too much, but the key difference is that white can go knight d5 and black can't. After d6, which loses the game, knight to d5 happens, attacks the queen, and forces it backward. White has two moves that win the game. One is very simple, the other is super cool. Could somebody name one of these two moves? And Melinda confirms. That's freaking hilarious. Okay, so e takes, so the simple move is e takes d6. This is called a discovered check. The pawn is not delivering the check. The queen is delivering the check, but the pawn moved. So the pawn opened up the queen's check. The bishop has to block, for example, and then you can take the pawn on c7. This is called a fork, attacking two or more pieces, generally with a knight. The king moves, and then you take the rook. So, and if the queen takes the knight, then the pawn defends the queen, or defends the knight. So this is very simple. But in such cases, you can often change the move order. You can take on c7 first, but wait a minute, this blunders the knight, right? The pawn is no longer on d6, so the queen can just take the knight. But if you're well versed in tactics, you'll find he takes d6. This is again a discovered check, and this time it's the queen that's going to be lost, not the knight. So black cannot take this knight. Black has to move the king. White takes the rook. White is up a full rook. That's a huge amount of material. And basically the game is over. So the lesson to extract from this is, I mean, it's nothing spectacular, but it's kind of nice. When you've got two moves that you're trying to play, 1, 2, you should always try to figure out what happens if I switch up the move order. What if I play the second move first, and then the first move, second? Sometimes that makes a very big difference. Sometimes you can only do things in one particular move order. Here you can do it in either. But that's the consequences of, of having a big development advantage. You get all this stuff that happens to you if you don't have any pieces developed. Your king gets under fire super early. And that's what, 200 gifted subs makes the night a little bit brighter. Absolutely. Yeah, Charlie Raid does that as well. Any questions? There's so much to talk about. If you're a beginner, you would completely understand it if you felt overwhelmed at this point. So I tried to cover some of the basic concepts behind this opening. Thank you, X Aloha Anthony. Speaking on ignoring general rules at higher level play, generally another sub I animated. Wow. What elo or level do you suggest ignoring that don't damage the pawn structure rule? Well, I would say like intermediate level, like 14, 1500. You can start getting a little bit more comfortable in doubling your pawns and stuff if you know why you're doing it. Why not queen e7? Oh, because the pawn can take the queen. That's a good thought. You're blocking the check, but the pawn controls both squares diagonally. Why queen d8 and not queen d7? It doesn't matter. The same thing can happen after both moves. Like literally the same position. It changes very little. Yeah. Let me see. Okay. Do you have my... No, I don't have an opening named after me. I'm not nearly good enough to have an opening named after me. You know, maybe one day after I retire, we will revisit that question. I will definitely stream again tomorrow, and I'll do my best to give you a good show. So, thank you all. Thank you, Bruja, Charlie, for the raid, Dikayo for the massive support, and everybody for being awesome. Let's raid Gari. Good night, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.